Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening, everyone. I am Nahid Ahmed, Head of Public Programs at NYU Abu Dhabi Institute. It is my honor to welcome you all to this special evening as we celebrate the inaugural Dhikhr Award. This initiative was launched to mark UAE National Day and to honor individuals who have made significant contributions to the UAE's development and to the growth of the Institute. The word Dhikhr, meaning treasure, in Arabic and the Emirati dialect, reflects the essence of this award. As an Emirati, I have always been inspired by the vision and values of the founding father, the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, rahimahullah. His words, the book is the vessel of knowledge, civilization, culture, learning, literature, and the arts. Nations are not measured by their material wealth alone, but by their civilizational authenticity, have always resonated with me. I wanted to create something meaningful through my work at the Institute to give back to the UAE and its community. When the idea of the Dhikhr Award first came to mind, the name of Frauke and David Heard immediately stood out. Their invaluable work, particularly David's documentation of the Gulf's oil industry, a story so close to the heart of this nation, made them the perfect recipients. Little did we know that we would also be honoring David's remarkable legacy after his passing. Frauke and David are truly Dhikhr و فخر. A treasure and a source of pride for the UAE. The Institute's role as a center for scholarly activity makes it the perfect platform to recognize and celebrate contributions like theirs, ensuring their legacy is appreciated for generations to come. Thank you for being here to share in this meaningful celebration. I will now pass the floor to our Executive Director of the Institute, Maurice Pomerantz, who will guide us through the program for this evening. Maurice, over to you.
Dear esteemed guests, Asad Allah masa'akum bi kulli khair. I first want to begin by thanking Nahid for this wonderful inspiration. And as she mentioned, this award, Dhikhr, means treasure. Its valence in Arabic suggests that it means saving something worthy of preservation and care. And we thought of the way, in fact, Nahid told me of the way it might apply to a cherished person. And also I thought about the work that that person might do on behalf of others, saving up what needs to be preserved. And as Nahid said, we could think of no other individuals like Frauke and the late David Heard more worthy of this award. Now, as many of you in the audience know, their work individually as authors has been foundational to our understanding of the political, economic, and social history of the UAE. I am here up on stage with remarkable books that tell a remarkable 20th and 21st century story. The late David Heard, who after studying at Keele University in Staffordshire, came to Abu Dhabi in 1963 as a young petroleum engineer. He had a 40-year career in the oil industry. Shortly after retiring, Heard began another career as an author and historian of the dramatic rise of the oil industry in Abu Dhabi. Reading that remarkable work, he writes, "The story of the remarkable men who searched for oil, how they succeeded and failed, worked together, or became exasperated by one another." Reading these volumes, the last of which was published shortly before his passing, is itself a treasure trove of documentary sources, rare photographs, maps, details that are only enhanced by the depth of knowledge and humanity that David brought to this subject. Dr. Frauke Heard-Bey likewise embodies this award's meaning in her character and work. A graduate of Heidelberg University and later the Freie Universität in Berlin, she had done her dissertation on European politics. In 1967, she came to Abu Dhabi, where shortly thereafter she joined the Center for Documentation and Research. She is well known as the author of two seminal works on the history of Abu Dhabi, so From Trucial States to United Emirates, A Society in Transition, published first in 1982, and then subsequently published multiple times, and Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, and the Gulf region, 50 Years of Transformation, published by Gerlach Press in 2017. They are, in my estimation, and perhaps in all of yours, the great storytellers of the remarkable story of this nation. We are sincerely grateful for their efforts that we commemorate with this gathering and this award this evening before National Day. I'm also honored to be joined here tonight by His Excellency Zeki Nusseibeh, Chancellor of UAE University and Cultural Advisor to the President of the UAE, who's kindly agreed to offer some thoughts on this special occasion. So I'm inviting now Dr. Frauke and His Excellency Zeki Nusseibeh to the stage. So thank you. Please. You should have microphones, I think.
Yes.
Are they on? Okay.
Is this on?
I think so. Everyone can hear.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, excellent. Frauke, I wanted to ask you to begin to reflect on what have been some of the joys and challenges of writing history in the UAE. I sort of look at you as an observer and a historian in many ways. You're a witness to history. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the joys and challenges. The joys, I think, was that I didn't have to write it. Nobody told me to.
Mm-hmm.
But it grew, really, because I realized soon after I arrived, and Zaki and I happened to arrive around the same time, 67, that so much was changing, and suddenly the world was actually looking at what was happening in the Gulf, which was, hadn't been before, and all these, not all these, but some journalists came to comment about it in Financial Times or Wall Street Journal or something, and then they came again 6 or 10 months later and observed the physical changes, easier to observe. Whereas I realized that I was here, I could see what else was changing and the challenges and so I myself wanted to find out more. And really, starting to write means that you understand better what you really want to find out. And I realized I had been privileged to learn how to research something and put it in words, but my understanding of Islam, my understanding of what was a tribe, my understanding of this entire world here was zero, because my specialization was completely European as a historian. But if you have the tools, so to speak, you get on with it. And that is really the beginning of that book, was that I first published a few articles that were published in England, in Asian Affairs and others. And then when you write a few articles, there's so many topics spaced out, and then somehow all of this had to be somehow come together. And that's when a book starts, and that's when but as I said, I didn't have to, and it wasn't, it took 10 years to write, but in those days also, You know, I wrote with lined paper, foolscap lined paper, and pencil first to begin with, because then I could rub out and cross out and so on. And then I typed it myself to begin with, and then changed things and so on, and then I had someone to type it for me. And so it went on, and then I approached Longmans, who at the time said they wanted to do something mostly for Middle East. They wanted to get more into the Middle East, and so they said yes, they would be interested. So I sent some samples and so on, and then one child was born, and the next child was born, and so on. And so anyway, and then one sends the manuscript, and then it comes back, and the maps have to be done. The publishing itself took another 2 years. I mean, this is unreal nowadays. People just, you know, you are also expected to send your print-ready manuscript nowadays, whereas in those days, you know, they sent back and said, we changed this, you know, from here to there and so on. Anyway, I go into detail in this because I think that is partly answering your question. The genesis of writing a book was different then and is very different now. But what was really what I'm very glad about, that it took so long, because I had the chance to revisit and revisit and visit people. Much of it come out of archive material in your office and so on, but much of it was visiting and revisiting. And I never took, not even, I had access to a UHA recording thing. I never took that. I didn't even take pencil and paper. I never photographed people, because at that time it was just ape. It wasn't done. And often when I come out, I write them something, and I knew I could come back. And indeed, when you talk to people and so on, and then the families actually hand you on, and then you can ask other people in the family and verify, and that was actually something that David mentioned in one of his books, that someone called Ronald Cordray, who was with the company and did some of the, collected some of the material that then is in David's books. And he had the method that he never interviewed one person alone. He would always insist, come all, and bring your friends and so on. And then he talked to all of them and got them into a conversation, because that is also much easier to verify what one is being told. So a long thing to your short answer question.
It's wonderful. They say of sort of writing any sort of work, you begin again every day.
Can I add
yes, please.
2 points here? Simply to say that when Frauke arrived here as a young scholar from Heidelberg via England, it was very clear for all of us that she's not going to stay as a typical oil housewife sitting in her cottage waiting for things to happen. So that was inevitable that she would use her scholarship to do something serious. But also at the time, as Abu Dhabi was preparing, and the UAE, to terminate the treaty relationships with Britain, the Diwan at the time, under the chairmanship of Ahmad Khalifa Suwaidi, who was chair, needed to find the archives for the Emirates, needed to look into the correspondence that was exchanged between the rulers and the different representatives of the British government. And so they started an archive center, in which, of course, Frauke was a central participant in trying to find these archives, and I'm sure these must have also inspired her to go further.
Well, I must say that Dr. Mohammed Morsi, who was
Mohammed Morsi,
he was, was a good team.
It's amazing to be able to have, basically, as the archive itself is being compiled, to be there working from within it. It sounds like these days a historian's dream in some ways, but I'm sure it didn't feel like that at the time. It felt...
It was good to be able to order some of the books.
They were very good in lending them to their friends. So
okay.
when I had an accident in Abu Dhabi and stayed in a kind of prefabricated hospital room, they made sure to bring me a supply of all these books to read while in bed. So
Yes, I still remember that very well.
I was thinking, actually, as we were talking outside, you said it's as if all of this was only yesterday. And this, I had been reading through David's his remarkable books, and he writes at one point at the beginning of the history of pearls to oil, he writes, "During the nearly 50 years I have been in Abu Dhabi, the world raced ahead, and Abu Dhabi has raced to catch up. Now, half a lifetime later, Abu Dhabi, is able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the best the world has to offer." And I was thinking about that, this, on the one hand, in human life, you look back, it's an instant. And at the same time, this instant has perhaps been one of the remarkable, as you were saying outside, actually, one of the most decade upon decade, change upon change. I mean, for us humans who are kind of good at slow time, I think, but at the same time witnessing perhaps one of the most rapidly changing places, because that's the one thing I always say now about Abu Dhabi. What is it like? Well, in 10 years it will be different. Could you help us?
As we were discussing outside, I believe that in somehow, the Emirates and Abu Dhabi seem to move every decade from one universe into another one, and yet somehow there is always this thread that ties the different universes together. We were discussing with some of our friends who were here in the early 70s that it would have been inconceivable then to think that over 50 years we would be today sending a probe to Mars and preparing a landing on the moon and a probe to explore Venus and its satellites, and to be ahead in artificial intelligence. And yet somehow it all seems logical and it all seems inevitable. So every time we move somewhere, that becomes the new starting point for a new generation. And I always say that I'm sure our children and grandchildren would live in the next 50 years the same kind of exciting journey that David, Frauke, myself, and our friends who were here in the early days have lived. And they would see as an equally amazing achievements, number of achievements that will propel the UAE even further into this future.
Maybe I just would like to add that the amazing thing was, especially in the 70s, when people who said, well, you must be living sort of at the end of the world, what are you doing there? And it was certainly classed as a hardship post, what David was doing, but it was so positive. I mean, everything, there seems to be positive changes all the time. And as newspapers started to come out and so on, you look in the newspaper and there was always it was always positive. Whereas nowadays you look in newspapers and you close them anyway and look somewhere else. But it is this feeling of goodness, wonderful. And it was really like this. And particularly at a time when one was made to feel that you are, what are you actually doing here? Why are you here? Why are you wasting your life here? Was what people on the outside sometimes seem to imply.
Yes. I was curious, now we're here on this campus. There are, it's a remarkable venture here, I think. It's it's the story that I've known, at least for the last decade, so much shorter time. It's gone by in a heartbeat. I wondered about, and I've seen our students change over time, and I wonder about this next generation. I've taught so many local students, I've taught students from all over the world, kind of what this history, how we can teach this kind of remarkable, how do we talk to our students about this remarkable 50 years and onward. I was thinking about, what are some of the important ways for young people in this society to remember their past, because it does feel like it's all going so very fast.
And this is, I mean, from the outset, I remember Sheikh Zayed was very clear in the kind of objectives he set for the UAE. First interview I had with him in 1968 for a documentary. He told us that he wishes to open the country, bring in modernization, or have bridges of exchange with the rest of the world, but at the same time make sure that this is in equilibrium with preservation of the national identity, of heritage, and of who we are. And I believe that the successive leaders have worked on this, so we need to address our students. And in fact, the president, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, was also very clear in setting this as a priority. We need to tell our students from the beginning also, instill in them from the outset this respect for the heritage, for history, for the tradition, for the national identity, while giving them this opportunity to have a window that opens onto the world in the way that we have it here in New York University.
Yeah, well, I would maybe another aspect also of teaching and preserving the history of with so much fake news coming into everybody's intake, it is important to maybe stop and think of how does one actually consume the history that has already been written. And on that, I would say, and it goes into what I want into the future, that it is so important to not take what you are given as the last fact. And anything that any historian writes anywhere at any time, it should be seen as a building block for others. It is never the last word on something. It is always an initiative, I think, for people to think about what they read or hear, and if one wants to then question that, and then see it as an initiative, or else just not believe it all. I mean, it is so important that history writing is an ongoing process, and it is always, I mean, with all the books that one has used as in the footnotes and so on, it is written by people whose thinking and value system also was what they had at the time. But our systems change, our views change, we learn more and so on, and that's really important, that history is an ongoing process, and writing it and reading it and believing it is an ongoing process.
Thank you. I remember that was very clear from you, right? When we were speaking ahead of this, you said to me very much about one of the things about David's book, your own. It's a great. You mentioned, of course, the indices, and like any good scholar, I was immediately like, yes, of course, the indices. But as tools, we write books as tools in some ways, but they're also invitations. They're invitations to learn more. You've been so generous, also yourself and David, in preserving actually the archive, a larger archive of your work here at NYU Abu Dhabi in our library. And I've already heard from our archivist, Brad, who I'm looking at right now, that we've had students come and already start working on things like doctoral dissertations.
That's amazing.
And what better, I think, for scholars, what better sort of thing to hope for, I guess, is that one's work sort of blossoms and grows in directions perhaps we could never imagine. And again,
that's the direction, yes.
Yes. With the idea of an invitation, we also would like it if anyone has any comments they'd like to share with us about Frauke and David. If anyone would volunteer, we can pass the microphone around. If anyone has something to say. Please. We do. Someone's coming around.
I'll be the warm-up act. Dr. Frauke, when you were writing your book, preceded David's writing of his volumes, there was a number of decades in between. Was he so put off by what you went through that it took him decades to follow up on that? Or what was the differences in the approaches both of you had when you were actually writing your books? And a follow-up question is for, of course, Abu Anwar, Dr. Zaki and Seba. When are we going to start reading your books? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mohammed, your question. It was decades between my first as a book. In fact, my thesis was published as a book as well, but that's a different matter. That had nothing to do with the Gulf here. But from '82, and then David's first book was published in 2011, so there's quite a hiatus between. And it actually came about that David, I would almost say he had two different aspects, three lives. He had three lives. In the first life, from 63 to 79, he was a petroleum engineer, often in the desert, even when he was in the office in Abu Dhabi. Anytime he might have had to go to the desert. And then from 79 onwards, he was for many years the liaison between the oil company, which was headquartered in London, and the government here. And when that was finished, he then turned to material which actually, a bit of a story behind that, His Excellency Ahmed Khalifa Suwaidi, who we have had the privilege of counting as one of the dearest family friends, he realized, with being also the with the center documentation and helping with this, that it's important to verify also the economic history of this country, and who would better be in a position to maybe have material about it? Of course, the oil companies. And so he asked David to see if one could access this archive material. For several years, the great and good in the company actually didn't allow it. But finally, we were allowed to actually copy and use and access material. And I won't tell you the details of where this was actually, how one could access it. Wasn't particularly comfortable, but slowly we got the material. And then David, the idea was first to simply, select and publish. And that was really the beginning of David then getting so involved and so engaged, and that I held off. I had helped to collect the material, to select, but I held off, and he took off and really developed his third life, I would say. And the last of his books, about 10 days before he died, actually, we had a book launch of all the 6 volumes, 6 books of the 5 volumes, one was a double, being presented in Munich, by the Gerlach book press. And there was almost as many people as we have here now. And David was still in a position to talk to people. And yes, maybe I should add, with the last volume that had just come out in September, which would really be useful for the academic community who use these books, that he added a very detailed, of several detailed indices covering all 6 books. And that was an enormous effort. And he worked on that from time to time, coming out of the hospital and still reading corrections and so on. And so it really was wonderful that the book came out in September. I hope that answers your question.
To give you a rapid answer, Abdul Latif, we said that the UAE moves at an accelerated rate from decade to decade. It's actually moving now from day to day at an accelerated rate. So perhaps when I sit back, retire, and I'm in Al-Ain, something will come out. But in the meantime, we need books on trading families in the UAE, similar to the one we had on the Kanu family in Bahrain.
My cousin Khalid wrote the book, and both Dr. Frauke and David were at the launch.
Yes, I saw that. So that was the older generation. We look for the new generation with your new trading families around.
They refer to us as the Shabab.
This was our colleague Werner Sollers called it Man Musta in German. Someone ought to write a book about. That's a classic scholarly jest. I see another hand. Bill, please.
Thank you for this talk, and I'm actually, I guess, maybe building on that phrase about someone ought to write a book about. I'm intrigued by the conversation around the relationship between news and what's covered and the building blocks for future histories. And having been here now for 10 years and still seeing only a handful of narratives coming from, especially from Western papers, about the UAE, and living here for this long, I know that there are so many stories and narratives around the UAE which have not yet been told. So I'm curious, as you're thinking about future historians who are building on your work, what are some of those stories that ought to be written of the kind of other histories of the UAE that you think the world should know more about?
There's a tradition of oral storytelling, which has not yet been thoroughly mined. And I know that at present there are people out, researchers, that have been set to go and speak to all these, the older generation, people who will not be with us perhaps for much longer. And in order to write the different stories, this should give us a new and rich also archive, because a lot of the history, as you know, traditionally was kept as a memory, and it's amazing how much details, especially the older generation, can bring to your attention. They can remember an event or a meeting or something that had happened on such a day, in such a year, in such a place, and give you the minutest of details about the kind of conversation that took place or the kind of things that happened. So I hope that this will be a rich, new source of archival material for books to come out, especially with the focus today, as I said, on the national identity, on the heritage of mankind, the immaterial heritage of mankind, the work that has been done with the UNESCO in order to have them recorded as part of our immaterial heritage. There is a lot to be mined and a great deal to be learned about these traditions and this history.
Yeah, well, I would have had many things one could talk about, but how about the built environment is something where I think it is very important to keep track of, because we talk about all these many changes, and to actually track it with a sort of systematic, historical systematic approach of, and I know there have been some attempts and some things have been published, but it was very often initiatives that came into books that nobody could see or find. And I think it is very important to, for instance, the electricity, how is electricity, how did it came here, how was it used, and how has it developed, how is it being integrated, and how is the state integrating into something as important as electricity, or water, of course. And the road systems, there is so much one could research, which means sort of a very different approach. You don't necessarily only go to archives, but well, now, of course, you mine all this from the internet. And it is so important to keep track of the built environment, because it's being built and rebuilt and changed the whole time. So that is one of the Anregungen that I would give.
I saw one other question, one hand. Yes, Professor Derlugian, I don't know. Oh, okay. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, first of all, nice to see both of you up there. This question is more on the arts side of things. Both of you are, in your own right, artists, one a linguist, one a scholar. And today, of course, so many things are changing. Town is changing, as you rightly said, changes dramatically every few years, every 10 years. But what you both went through, what my father went through, what Mohammed Khan went through, at that time, it was a pioneer kind of spirit. The whole town was dominated by this idea that we just build, we just work together and make something happen. Didn't matter if you were an artist or you were a painter or you were a linguist, you just made what had to happen, right? And you yourself just mentioned you came here, you had ideas, and then the children came. Oh my God, it's like, you had to deal with that, right? So as an artist, having children in the middle of Abu Dhabi, as it's being built, how did you find the time? Because I struggle to find the time even now, but of course now we have so many options, so many capabilities. We can reach, New York in an instant. We can, but then, you were trapped in this station where you had to build this town. There were problems that needed to be solved. So, I guess my question is, why doesn't someone write a book about that, in a sense, right? Like how we made it happen, like literally made it happen. I don't mean just one sector, but the arts, how they helped develop this town.
Well, Sohail, thank you for the question. If I understand correctly, you meant that how does one, how was it possible to, for everyone around here to actually get these things done? And maybe then a personal question also, how did we, David and myself, how did we find the time? Well, 2 of our children are here, as you well know, and I hope they did not get too short shrift from their mother being, being occupied. I hope, yeah. And somehow, there seemed to have been more time in the past than there's now. But everybody complains, time goes faster. I would like to maybe say one thing about art in particular, since it's you who asked, that it was a huge surprise to me to find that art was suddenly blooming. I mean, it came from nowhere. And my first experience was art physically really was at the higher colleges of technology, the women's college with which I was sort of involved from time to time. I had the privilege to go and see things happening there. And they didn't have a curriculum for art, not at all, but they had an art teacher who was helping people, ladies who wanted to either paint or photograph or draw or whatever in their lunchtime or in after hours. And this group then made an exhibition once a year. And I was just bowled over. These were ladies who, almost all of them did not have the privilege of having, drawing as in the kindergarten and then having art lessons at school that were boring and looked at things one didn't understand and so on. And they had no background. But they were taught just the facility of what you do when you have a pencil in your hand and you look at this and you do this and that. And what came out of this, I was just bowled over. And then later, this developed into the, what they called it, the exhibitions in the Cultural Foundation, the Rose, something about Rose, where the ladies sent from their higher colleges when they had actually a curriculum for journalism and photography and making short stories and so on, when this was all exhibited in wonderful exhibitions every year. And this blossomed. And I can only say that art actually probably thrives best from the aha, that somebody just suddenly realizes, I can do this, and we can do this, and other people can do it, and now let's do it. And I think that was my experience here. I'm still amazed.
Let me add to this, because as an artist, of course, yourself, and I know that you recognize that artists will go on and create what they want to create, regardless of what is happening around them. And here in the New York Art Center, Maya, who's around somewhere, I think, started working into tracing the history of modern contemporary art in the Emirates. And she brought together the works of artists who were active in the 70s and 80s, producing avant-garde, if you like, abstract, contemporary art that is part of the tradition that grew here. So I believe that art has been there from the beginning, despite everything that is happening around us. We've had a series of, as you said, art exhibitions in the Cultural Foundation, and they developed organically. I mean, what was happening also in Sharjah with the Biennale, what was happening in Dubai, what was happening in Abu Dhabi, in particular with the development of, after the Cultural Foundation, a cultural center district on Saadiyat Island, and then the arrival of the international museums, the directors, and then the interest that was also inspired by the presence here of large number of artists, not only Emirati, but also from the region and international. The arrival of the auction houses here, the opening of the Louvre Museum Abu Dhabi, we're going to have the Guggenheim. So it has been an organic development, but what I want to say is from the outset, there has been this drive to create beautiful things, and artists were adventurous, and they were ambitious, and they were exciting from those very early days. And had you started buying their works then for a few hundreds of dirhams, they are in the hundreds of thousands of dirhams now.
Do you have one more? Okay, I think we'll take these last two questions, and then we have other business to attend to.
Dr. Frauke, I just wanted to thank you so much for me being here. Actually, I knew you through Qasr al-Husn, and we've been reading a lot about you, and we have a room dedicated about the archivings that you've been working on. So knowing you through papers, knowing you through documentation, this is something that has helped us and developed us to understand Abu Dhabi, to understand Al-Husn, to understand how life used to be. So thank you so much for everything that you've been doing, and this is something that we always remember. Even before the reopening of Qasr al-Husn, we always used to say, if we don't know anything, let's just go and ask Dr. Frauke, and definitely she'll have an answer.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. And of course,
In addition, I just wanted also to say to David, whenever I meet him, I always leave with a lesson from him, whether it's related to life, whether it's related to career development. Just having a conversation with him every time, he just leave me with a smile, leave me with something that to be more optimistic and to teach me in so many ways. So thank you so much.
thank you for that remark. Thank you.
If I may, Frauke, you know, we have known each other for now 13 years, as I realize with amazement. I've been teaching your book for 13 years, and David's so many years. So it's, in state formation, it's always Max Weber and Frauke Heard-Bey. In oil, it is Daniel Yergin and David Heard. And it will stay so as long as I'm here, at least for another 3 years. But I must admit I have a difficulty. I have to teach 24 students how to read through a very disciplined and very detailed book, and how to demand that they read it. And there is not, well, what I could do is add a little bit of oral history, but that's what I heard from you. What it was, what kind of revolution was the introduction of Land Rover here? Or how did Sheikh Zayed drive? His driving. Or what did you do with the big fish before electricity here? And all these things which are mundane but extremely revealing. Would you please care to write this down?
Well, thank you for this incitement. Yeah, I might. Yes, one is always short of time.
Well, I think on that note, I'd like to invite the Vice Chancellor on stage, Fabio Piano. And we'll, the award is here. Frauke, if you would stand up. I believe this is the award. It looks very much award-like. So. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you all. We'll continue. We'll open the doors, and we'll continue onwards to talk, reflect, and hopefully grow more of that amazing oral history, which starts in these sorts of moments. So thank you all for coming, and have a good evening.